All right, so you've been digging deep into this Cherry Proxy thing, huh?
Yeah.
It seems like you're really building up a whole file on this residential proxy service.
Mm-hmm.
You sent over a pretty in-depth review.
Yeah.
And it looks like you're pretty impressed with Cherry Proxy, especially if you're an SEO pro like yourself. Let's try to break it all down.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head right away. This deep dive is for you. So let's say you're out there and you're looking for a good proxy service. Maybe you need to gather some data or maybe manage your social media or, like you said, really boost your SEO efforts. The big question is Cherry Proxy the right tool for you?
Yeah, and from this review, it seems like it could be, the review starts off by highlighting some pretty impressive stats.
Mm-hmm.
They've got over 80 million residential IPs covering a whopping 195 countries. I mean, that's a pretty massive network.
Yeah, it's a huge EE network. And think about it this way. When you're using a proxy, you're basically borrowing someone else's IP address to browse the web. And when you go with Cherry Proxy, you're not just borrowing one address, you're tapping into this massive pool of IPs from all over the world. So it makes it super hard for websites to detect you and block you because it just looks like all these requests are coming from different places, like genuine user traffic.
Gotcha. So that's really important for SEO work, right?
Yeah.
Because if you're constantly getting blocked when you're trying to scrape data or check rankings, it's going to be tough to get anything done.
Absolutely. And it's not just about how many IPs they have, it's about the quality too. Cherry Proxy says they have a 99.9% uptime. That means their servers are pretty much always up and running.
That's good.
And they've got super fast response times, like an average of 0.7 seconds.
Oh, yeah?
So you can expect really speedy connections, which is super important when you're doing things like web scraping where every millisecond counts.
Makes sense. Okay, so it sounds like Cherry Proxy has this huge and reliable network. But what about the cost? I know proxy services can get expensive.
That's true. But the good news is Cherry Proxy seems pretty reasonable, starting at $0.77 per gigabyte.
Okay.
Of course, the final cost depends on how much you use it and your specific needs, but that's a pretty competitive starting point.
All right, so far so good. Huge network, fast speeds, and the price isn't outrageous. But let's dig a little deeper. The review can't stop talking about Cherry Proxy's residential IPs.
Yeah.
What makes those so important, especially for SEO pros?
Residential IPs are the gold standard when it comes to proxies, especially if you're doing SEO. Remember, these IPs, they come from real internet service providers,
Right.
So they're linked to real homes and devices. So when you use a residential IP, you're basically browsing the web just like a regular user at home.
So that means that websites are less likely to think you're using a proxy and block you.
Exactly. Most websites, they have security measures in place to detect and block traffic that's coming from known data center IPs. Those are often used by multiple users and can trigger red flags. But when you use residential IPs, your activity just blends in with all the other genuine traffic. Makes it way harder to get spotted.
I see how that would be a game changer for SEO stuff like keyword research, competitor analysis, and rank tracking. You can gather all this data from different locations without raising any suspicions.
For sure. Let's say you're trying to track your website's ranking for a specific keyword in a bunch of different cities. With Cherry Proxy, you can choose residential IPs from those cities and see the search results just like you were physically there.
Oh, wow.
It gives you a real picture of how your local SEO is doing and helps you figure out what needs improvement.
That's amazing. It's like having virtual boots on the ground in every city you're targeting. The review also mentions something called IP rotation. What is that exactly?
Well, IP rotation is another key feature that helps you stay anonymous and avoid getting detected. Imagine you're scraping data from a website. If you keep using the same IP address over and over again, the website's going to get suspicious and probably block you. But with IP rotation, your IP address automatically changes at regular intervals. So it looks like a bunch of different users are accessing the site from all over the place.
Gotcha. So it's like a constantly shifting digital disguise that makes it really hard for websites to track what you're doing.
You got it.
Pretty impressive. What about geo-targeting? Is that the ability to choose IPs from specific locations?
You got it. Geo-targeting is super important for a lot of SEO tasks. Like, let's say you want to see how your website is doing in different countries. Well, Cherry Proxy's got this geo-targeting feature, so you can select IPs from those specific countries, and then you can check out the search engine results pages as if you were actually in that country. This gives you a global view of how visible your website is and helps you tailor your SEO strategy accordingly.
So it's not just gathering any old data. It's about getting highly targeted data that's relevant to your SEO goals.
Absolutely. And that's one of the things that sets Cherry Proxy apart from the competition. They give you a level of control and precision that's super valuable for SEO pros.
This is starting to sound pretty promising, but
Yeah.
before we get too carried away, the review mentioned that Cherry Proxy offers different types of proxies. Can you explain what that means?
Sure. Cherry Proxy offers static residential proxies and rotating ISP proxies.
Okay.
Static residential proxies are great for tasks where you need to use the same IP address over a long period of time, like if you're managing social media accounts.
Right.
Think of it like having a dedicated IP address for each of your social media profiles.
So you're not jumping between IPs all the time, which could raise red flags.
Exactly. With static residential proxies, all your social media activity looks way more natural and organic. Now, rotating ISP proxies, those are best for when you need a really high level of anonymity, like if you're doing a ton of data scraping or web testing.
Gotcha. So because your IP address is always changing, it's super hard for websites to track you and block you.
Right. And what's cool about Cherry Proxy is they offer both types of proxies. So you've got the flexibility to pick what's best for you and your specific needs.
All right, we've covered a lot here. We've talked about their massive IP network, their speed and reliability, the different types of proxies, and why residential IPs are so important for SEO. But before we move on, I've got to ask about security. A lot of people are nervous about giving up their data when they use proxy services.
Yeah, I get that. It's a valid concern. The review makes a big deal about how Cherry Proxy takes security super seriously.
Okay, good.
They use SSL/TLS encryption, which is like the industry standard for protecting data as it travels across the internet. You can think of it like a super secure tunnel that shields all your information from anyone trying to snoop.
So even if someone managed to intercept your data, they wouldn't be able to read it.
Exactly. They also use really strict authentication protocols, so only authorized users can get into their service. It's like an extra layer of security to protect your account and data.
Sounds like they've got all their bases covered when it comes to features, performance, and security. But the review also mentions some other services like NetNut, SOAX, and WebShare. Should we check those out too?
Absolutely. It's always a good idea to shop around and compare different services before you commit to one.
True.
These other options also offer residential IPs, and they have some pretty impressive features of their own.
All right. This is where things get interesting. We got to see how these alternatives measure up to Cherry Proxy, especially when it comes to performance, pricing, and ease of use. But I think that's a deep dive for another time.
Yeah, I think so. Let's save that for our next segment.
Okay, sounds good.
Welcome back. So we've got a good idea of what Cherry Proxy has to offer. But now let's see how it actually performs in the real world and what it's like to use. Because having a bunch of fancy features and marketing hype is one thing, but does it actually deliver?
That's what I'm wondering. This review seems pretty gung-ho about it. They talk about this user-friendly dashboard and 24/7 customer support.
Yeah.
And they say it integrates seamlessly with popular tools.
Yeah.
But is that all just marketing fluff, or is there something real behind it?
Well, the review does have some specific performance numbers that caught my eye. Like, they highlight a 99% success rate when trying to connect.
Okay.
And they talk about a low server load distribution, which suggests a smooth and reliable experience for users.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, if you're using a proxy for important stuff, you don't want the connection to drop out all the time or for the server to be overloaded. Sounds like Cherry Proxy has a pretty solid infrastructure to handle a lot of traffic.
Right. And we can't forget about customer support. I mean, imagine you're in the middle of some project, you're on a tight deadline, and you run into some technical problem with your proxy. You need a support team that's going to get back to you quickly and actually knows what they're doing.
Absolutely. I see they offer a few ways to get support. Email, live chat, and even a Discord server. That's pretty impressive for a proxy service. But is their support team actually helpful?
Well, the review seems to think so. They say the average email response time is under 2 hours, which is pretty decent.
Okay.
And having live chat and Discord means you can talk to someone in real time, which can be a lifesaver if you're in a real bind.
And then there's that affiliate program we talked about earlier. So if you're happy with Cherry Proxy, you can actually earn some cash by referring other users.
Yeah, it's a smart move. It encourages people to spread the word, and it builds up this whole community around the service. Plus, it shows that Cherry Proxy believes in their product enough to offer something like that.
Okay, so Cherry Proxy seems to be doing well so far. Good performance, responsive support, and you can even make some money on the side. But let's not forget those other services we mentioned earlier. It's time to compare them head-to-head and see which one comes out on top.
You're right. We got to see how they stack up. Remember NetNut, SOAX, and WebShare? They all have their own strengths and cater to different needs. Let's start with NetNet. They say they have a huge network too, over 85 million IPs with direct connections to ISPs, just like Cherry Proxy.
And they really push their real-time analytics, which could be a big plus for SEO people who are all about data and want to keep a close eye on their performance. But how does NetNet's pricing compare to Cherry Proxy? And is it as easy to use?
That's where the review leaves us hanging a bit. We know NetNet starts at $5, but we don't know what that gets you compared to Cherry Proxy's $0.77 per gigabyte plan. It would be good to see a side-by-side comparison of their pricing plans to get a real sense of the cost difference.
Yeah, and while NetNet says they have a nice dashboard, we don't know if it's as easy to use as Cherry Proxy's. Is it just as intuitive and simple to navigate?
Those are good questions. Ease of use can make a big difference when you're picking a proxy service, especially if you're not a tech expert. Nobody wants to waste time trying to figure out a complicated interface.
Now, what about SOAX? They say they have a massive 155 million IPs, and they offer super precise targeting down to the carrier level.
Oh yeah, they do. That level of granularity could be really useful for certain SEO tasks, like if you need to analyze search results from specific mobile carriers or ISPs. But is it too much for the average user? And how does their pricing compare to Cherry Proxy?
Well, the review says SOAX starts at $2.30 per gigabyte, which is a bit more expensive than Cherry Proxy. So you're getting more precise targeting, but you're paying a bit more.
Right. It's a trade-off. You have to think about whether that level of targeting is really worth the extra cost. If you're mostly doing general keyword research and rank tracking, Cherry Proxy's targeting options might be enough.
And lastly, we've got WebShare, which seems to be all about keeping things affordable. They start at just $8.89 per proxy for their data center IPs.
Yeah.
They offer both data center and residential IPs, which could give you more flexibility. But how do they measure up against Cherry Proxy and the others when it comes to performance?
That's a good question. And unfortunately, the review doesn't give us a clear answer. They talk about WebShare's pricing, but we don't know much about their speed, reliability, or success rates. Are they really fast or are they a bit sluggish? How often do their proxies get blocked?
And what about security? Do they have the same level of encryption and authentication as Cherry Proxy? These are all things that could sway your decision.
For sure. You want to make an informed decision, right? We need more information to compare these services properly, maybe some benchmark tests that show how they perform in real-world situations, like how do their success rates compare when you're scraping data from popular websites?
Right.
Or how do their speeds differ in various locations?
Yeah, that would be super helpful. It would be great to have a table that lays out all the key features, pricing, performance metrics, and pros and cons of each service. That would make it much easier to choose the right one.
Imagine a table that shows each service's IP pool size, geographic coverage, pricing tiers, key features, and maybe even user ratings. That would give users all the information they need to compare and choose the best fit for their needs.
So it's looking like Cherry Proxy might be a good option, but we need to do a bit more research before we can say for sure. We need to take a closer look at those alternatives and really weigh the pros and cons.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The proxy world is always changing. New services pop up all the time, and existing ones are constantly updating what they offer. So you got to stay in the loop, keep exploring, and don't be afraid to try different things out. Find the proxy solution that works best for your SEO goals and how you like to work.
All right, so this has been a pretty interesting deep dive. And I think we've given you a good starting point for choosing your next proxy service.
Yeah, I think so. Remember, having the right proxy can be a huge advantage. It can help you uncover valuable information, protect your brand, and take your SEO strategy to the next level.
So do your homework, compare your options, and choose wisely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of proxies.
Absolutely. Until next time, happy browsing.
All right, so it's decision time. We've really dug into Cherry Proxy, and it's looking like a pretty solid option, especially if you're all about SEO, like yourself. But before we pick a winner, we need to check out those other services. We talked about some alternatives, right? And see how they stack up.
Right, exactly. Remember, the whole point is to find the tool that works best for you and how you like to do things. So let's go back to NetNet, SOAX, and WebShare.
Yeah, let's revisit those.
We talked about those a bit earlier.
NetNet seemed pretty impressive. They've got that huge network of IPs.
Yeah.
And they're really into those real-time analytics. But there are still some questions.
Yeah. The review didn't really break down NetNet's pricing, so we know it starts at $5. But we don't know how much bandwidth you get or what features are included or how many connections you can have at the same time. It's hard to compare that to Cherry Proxy's pay-as-you-go model at $0.77 per gigabyte. We need more info.
Right. And what about using it? The reviews said they have a nice-looking dashboard, but is it easy to use, like Cherry Proxies? That's a big deal, especially if you're not a tech expert.
Oh, yeah, for sure. You don't want to be fighting with the interface. It should be easy to use.
Right, exactly.
It'd be great to see some reviews from actual users, or maybe a demo video, so you can get a sense of what it's like to use NetNut.
Now, SOAX, they had that crazy level of targeting, remember, down to the carrier level. That seems super powerful, but maybe a bit too much.
Yeah, could be overkill. SOAX has a massive 155 million IPs, and you can target users based on their mobile carrier or even their internet provider. I mean, that could be really valuable for some super specific SEO research.
Yeah.
But do you need that for everyday stuff like tracking keywords or checking out your competitors?
Yeah, maybe not.
Oh.
And then there's the price. SOX is a little more expensive than Cherry Proxy. It starts at $2.30 per gigabyte. So you get more precise targeting, but it costs more.
Exactly. You got to weigh your options. Is that extra level of targeting worth the extra cash? For a lot of SEO people, Cherry Proxy's targeting options might be plenty.
All right. And then there's WebShare, the budget-friendly option. They have a mix of data center and residential IPs, and they start at just $0.89 per proxy for their data center options. That could be good for people who are watching their budget and need a bit of flexibility, but are they sacrificing performance to keep the price down?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? The review didn't really go into detail about WebShare's speed and reliability and how often their proxies get blocked. Are they super fast, or do they lag a bit?
Right. And what about security? Do they take security as seriously as Cherry Proxy? Do they have the same level of encryption and authentication? That's important stuff.
It is. You need all the facts before you can make a good decision. It'd be great to see some head-to-head comparisons, like some tests that show how these services perform in real-life situations, like how well do they do when you're scraping data, or how do their speeds compare in different parts of the world?
Yeah, that would be super helpful. A nice comparison table would make it so much easier to see the pros and cons of each service and pick the one that fits your needs and your budget the best.
Right. A table that shows the IP pool size, the locations they cover, the different pricing plans, the key features, and maybe even some user ratings. That would give people all the info they need to make a smart choice.
So Cherry Proxy is looking pretty good, but we need to do a bit more homework before we make a final decision. We need to really dig into those other services and see what they're all about.
Absolutely. And don't forget, the proxy world is always changing. New services are popping up all the time, and the old ones are always updating their stuff. So stay up to date, keep learning, and try different things out. See what works best for you and your SEO goals.
All right, so this has been a really interesting deep dive, and I think we've given you a good starting point for figuring out your next proxy service.
I hope so. Picking the right proxy can make a big difference. It can help you uncover all sorts of valuable info, keep your brand safe, and take your SEO to the next level.
So do your research, compare your options, and choose wisely. Thanks for hanging out with us for this deep dive into the world of proxies.
Absolutely. Until next time.